think it's important to know that. The company has been building data centers for over 30 years. We started out building data centers for enterprises and companies like Sentinel and healthcare systems like Roper Healthcare System in the East and BJC here in the Midwest. So a tremendous amount of data center experience. About 10 years ago, we started really building hyperscale level data centers, which I guess you would classify as larger than, say, 15 megawatts. And I've kind of lost track of how many megawatts we've delivered in the last 5 years or so, but I would say we're in the top 5 builders of hyperscale data center work. Essentially for all the technology companies in one way or another, hyperscalers, we enjoy a pretty good position in the overall market. So one of the things that's really interesting is how widely spread out these projects are. We're building in about 50 different markets right now across the United States, pretty heavy concentration in the Northeast, but Southeast, Northwest, 57 projects under construction right now. Interestingly, nothing in our backyard, nothing in the metropolitan St. Louis region. I feel like St. Louis has been left behind in many, many ways. I think there was a story in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago about the doom loop. Our city has suffered tremendous loss of jobs, corporate headquarters. We've lost over 50 corporate headquarters since I started Clayco 40 years ago. What was once a thriving community where I felt like I could build a business that could be a local business became a kind of a negative scene that caused Clayco to go far and wide to seek our work. So we traveled quite a bit, and it's been frustrating to me to watch this happen to our community. I have over 2,000 employees in the St. Louis and the Missouri region. In the last few years, we've made a big commitment to try to bring more of our jobs back to St. Louis, to the St. Louis region. We do have a large facility in Chicago, but we also have offices in the East and in California, Phoenix. We have a large presence there. I think it's been frustrating to watch what's happened to the St. Louis region, and I call it the city of lost opportunities. I think people have heard me say that before. All the way back at the turn of the century, we lost the railroads, went to Illinois, to Chicago, and pretty much ever since then, we've missed some of the big opportunities to really bring economic development to the community. So it was with good intentions a couple of years ago that I went to the governor, to various political people around the state, and more importantly, I went to Ameren, who's our major utility on the eastern side of the state, to ask them why St. Louis couldn't attract more of this economic engine that is blowing up across the country. So we went to Ameren. We started working really closely with them. We've been meeting them monthly for the last 2 years. We've really studied the business, the industry, the transmission lines, the potential for major economic engine development of data centers in the community. We found a handful of what I think are really great locations. When we started the process, data center backlash, I would say, had not really started. So this has been a phenomenal thing to watch come together over the last probably 18 months. And it seems like each month it intensifies with the fear of AI, some of the technology people coming out themselves and saying that it's going to have tremendous negative impact on white-collar jobs, something whether you believe it or not. I'm more optimistic about than some of the naysayers are. I found our process of engaging with artificial intelligence and these new agents and engines have made us more productive. I haven't seen an opportunity yet to envision our company without a full parking lot. I think our parking lot will get more full over the next few years, so I'm really optimistic. Our company will grow, and maybe we won't grow employment at the same level. Activity is going to increase tremendously. So I'm more of an optimist about the technology itself. But I'm very aware of the negative backlash, the concern, legitimate concern about how data centers are going to impact communities, but also I'm highly aware of the economic engine that they create, which is really kind of shifting, particularly as suburban areas around the country have been really challenged economically. Even prosperous communities have been struggling with how they're going to meet their budgets and how they're going to keep their schools expanding and their fire departments and have the right level of security in their communities. Interestingly, in the places that we are working and building lots of data centers, there's lots of economic advantage coming to some of those communities. I think some of the backlash has been because of the general lack of transparency, which was the way that a lot of industry has built. Most of the car plants, most of the chemical factories, most of manufacturing jobs works under kind of an umbrella of confidentiality, particularly up until you get into the community approval process. So I think the transparency has to change, and I do understand communities really need to know what they're getting themselves into. I'm personally committed to a very transparent process. I think in the project I'm about to talk about, we were extremely transparent, and I'll get to that in a second. I think one really interesting thing is I've engaged with the Data Center Coalition across America, and I'm working closely with the community engagement and communication departments of the large technology companies. I was on the record having worked with Microsoft and AWS in the last 6 months on some of their communication efforts, that these companies have really stepped up to the plate to address some of the key issues, and it's going to be really important to remain competitive globally in the AI race. I don't think there's going to be any pullback, and I think data centers are going to have to be built, and the United States is going to have to remain competitive. And there are constraints. Power is a giant constraint. Available land is a constraint. And now we're going to deal with this public outcry, and these questions are going to have to be answered. And they're going to have to be answered appropriately. So I really believe that the eastern region of Missouri, with the right setup, can benefit tremendously from the expansion of these data centers in our community. And I hope that we can answer the questions that the press has and the public has. And I think we're committed at CLACO and CRG to having a very open, transparent process and trying to answer every question. So I think the key issues with these data centers have been utility costs, water, noise, location, tax breaks, and jobs. I think one of the really important things that I believe is that there's an incredible amount of misinformation and that there hasn't been good, successful responses to this misinformation. But these misinformation campaigns have been extremely well organized and well funded. And quite frankly, I think there's some truth, kernels of truth in the process. But I think in general that these data centers are here to stay. The expansion is good for communities, it's good for jobs, and that every one of these questions can be answered. On the utility front, there's tremendous legislation occurring across the United States right now, and our team actually was at a meeting with the White House with President Trump, who did an executive order saying that the utility companies should make the data center and technology companies pay their fair share. But there's already been legislation in place, particularly in Missouri, which has addressed that the ratepayers, the residences, should not pay for the expansion of the utilities by the data center companies. In terms of the water use, which I think is a very legitimate question, particularly in some of the desert states that we work in Arizona, the technology companies were building data centers that were mostly evaporative cooling. Almost all of the technology companies have converted their projects to closed-loop systems now and address the water concerns, at least for the most part. More work has to be done, and I think the technology is changing every day. We have our own engineers working on these systems. I think there's been accusations that the wastewater might have antifreeze in it and that sort of thing, and that is not true. There's no waste going out of any facility that we're building that's not as clean as the water that comes into the facilities. It's all being treated, so I think that question is answered. I think most of the backlash, this is really interesting because I've been in the room with probably 100 different people who started out as opponents in these projects. Most of these people haven't seen a data center. So one of the biggest things we've been able to do to turn the tide is get people to go look at data centers. We know some of the council people, we're going to get to Festus in a minute, from Festus went to see projects that they located on their own and came back a lot less alarmed than they were before they saw them. Experience from building data centers all over the country is that these facilities look like industrial warehouse buildings that are full of servers and full of air conditioners, and that they're relatively harmless, other than that they use a lot of energy and that we have to address those questions. They're not noisy. I think they're, in a lot of cases, they're less noisy than the highways or the roads near them. They're a lot less noisy than industrial warehouse buildings and all the truck traffic. And they do have generators that have to be tested, usually in conjunction with a plan with the neighborhoods that are around them, or the cities or the communities. So it's not like they just turn them on and turn them off without a plan. And I think that everybody's using their iPhones, and everybody's using their iPad, and everybody's using Facebook and technology, and it has to come from somewhere. I think in terms of the tax breaks, I think that's just simple math. I think each of these projects has to be weighed on its own economic weight to the community. In the case of Festus, the project will generate enormous additional new revenue, regardless of how you structure it, but we have committed to no tax abatement on that project. And I think all of the technology companies in their most recent published commitments have said that they're going to address all of these issues, and Microsoft in particular has said no new subsidies for their projects. And I think we're seeing a wave of a balance of less tax abatement, but the general economic benefit to communities like Festus is in the range of $40 million a year of new revenue. After all of the paperwork is said and done, that's an incredible boon to their economic livelihood for generations to come. So I just want to address two other things. Last week we were served by a lawsuit by a citizen group that claimed various things in the lawsuit that are related to transparency and the Sunshine Law. I can tell you from my perspective that Clayco, under no circumstance, violated any laws, any rules, that we acted appropriately through the entire process. We were completely forthright, and that all of the meetings that we had were public meetings where votes occurred. There was a 8-0 vote on the annexation, which was a public hearing. There was an 8-0 vote for the zoning, which was a public hearing, and there was a 6-2 vote to agree to our development agreement that was on March 30th, which was at a subsequent meeting where it was supposed to be approved on March 23rd, but they wanted the city council gave the public an additional meeting to give voice. And there was a lot of pros and cons to the project before that decision was made. It's my opinion that in that vote we were granted vested rights to develop the data center, and that we have all the appropriate zoning now to proceed with the project. Also want to address that 4 opponents to data centers were elected last week, and I completely respect democracy, elections, and I congratulate all the council people who were elected last week, and I look forward to getting the opportunity to sit down with them, some of whom have already been willing to sit down to listen, to explain the project in more detail. We're still at the beginning of the project. Just because we have vested rights to develop the project, we still have a lot of work to do, and it will be probably at least 6 or 9 months before we're ready to actually break ground on the project. So the public and the new council are going to get lots of time and opportunity to ask questions, and we're going to listen to every single question, and we're going to try to answer every question, and we're going to try to prove the case that it's good for Festus to have this kind of economic development in their community. So with that, I think I'll just stop and maybe answer some questions. I don't think that they can cancel the project. I think our rights are vested, so I think that'll be determined in the legal process. That's my opinion, is that we will aggressively defend our right to develop the project per the vested rights that we have in the development.
Vote also seemed to be a pretty clear expression of what the people of Festus were pressing that election and the results of it. But I think a lot of people watching might want to understand not the legal argument or the financial argument, but the human. Actually, the people of Festus have to accept something that their community has now.
Well, we've been in over 50 meetings with the public, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time in Festus. And I wouldn't say that this one election, while it absolutely is a demonstration by some people to elect officials who are opposed to the data center. I don't still think that they speak for the entire constituents, and I don't think the whole public understands the entire public benefit to their community. And so I think that the newly elected council people will represent all of their constituents, not just the people who elected them recently, and that they'll listen to us and they'll understand the project better. I don't think most of them have seen what we haven't seen, which are plans for the project, because we haven't completed any plans for the project yet. So I think that's going to be a give and take process, and I hope they'll listen to us, and I believe they will.
The extent to which you think that was a problem of CRG's own making. Some of the emails suggest that as early as November 7, 2025, City Administrator in Festus was emailing executives at CRG about these briefings they were having with council members and saying that the Festus data center, the cat was out of the bag. It seems to suggest that these meetings were being kept from the public in the early stages. Did CRG ever instruct city officials to avoid triggering the open meetings requirements by holding city council briefings in groups of 3?
I can't comment on that because I personally didn't have any communication like that. I don't think any communication like that happened, so that'll be determined by the outcome of the lawyers and litigation. I think we acted appropriately 100% of the time. I think it's not unusual for real estate developers or businesses, when they're working and interacting with the community, to have multiple meetings with council people. We invited council people to come to this facility to understand and to learn more about data centers, and we conducted over 50 public meetings, or some public and some small gatherings of meetings. So I think we acted transparently the entire process personally. So I don't think it was anything out of the ordinary, the process that we went through. And I think it's really notable also that the opposition held 2 meetings that were large gatherings, both of which we invited ourselves to, attended, and stayed for over an hour and answered questions. So to the question that we weren't present and we weren't answering questions, that's just not true.
Now that the project is approved, can you tell us which company is behind it? And if not, when do you expect that would be publicly revealed?
So we're still negotiating. We do not have a letter of intent or any kind of agreement with any of the specific hyperscalers. CRG is the entity that has the development rights, and we're negotiating in good faith with various hyperscale companies, and at the appropriate time we'll work with the city to make sure that they're the right fit for the community and that it'll be the right economic outcome for everyone. No, there is no specific hyperscale company that we're signed up with at this point. Exactly, yes. And I'm speaking directly to the Festus project.
So there's not
We don't have a hyperscale data center company signed up.
Mr. Bud, what would you say to all?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people that are for it too. So, I mean, I think we have to listen to both sides of the story. We certainly have people who are opponent. I don't know if you saw any of the meetings. I thought that there were some rational opponents to the project, and quite frankly, there was some irrational opponents. People were yelling and screaming, and I think behavior norms have really changed in America over the last few years, and it's gotten worse and worse, and I think every American citizen should be nervous and concerned about the way people are conducting themselves in these public meetings. And I think all I can say to every single one of them is that we're going to listen to every one of their concerns. They yell it at us, and we're going to try to answer their questions rationally. And listen, I think when you look at some of the development of data centers across the United States, some of them have been built in inappropriate locations. I don't think a data center should be built 100 feet from somebody's home. When you look at some of the projects in Virginia, they're extremely close to people's homes. I don't think that's appropriate. And this project that we're proposing, and the site is up here on your left, we're going to be over 1,200 feet away from people's homes when all is said and done, and 1,200 feet is a long way from somebody's house. I think the other notable thing about the site in Festus, and the reason that we became so interested in this site, and I'll just take a second and point to the site over here. It's obviously on a highway, It's on a loud highway that's being expanded as we speak. There's a tremendous construction project. There are industrial uses all along Highway 67 right now. I think what's really interesting about Festus, Arnold, Herculaneum, the whole area around there is it's a nice mix. It's not just a bedroom community where people are driving to St. Louis every day for jobs. They have an economic engine of their own. I think the data center adds value to that economic engine to make their community a thriving suburban center as opposed to just a bedroom community where people are driving back and forth. If you look on the left, you see a large transmission line. That's where that light green section is. That's why the site is attractive to us. It's on a highway. And if you notice on the right, there's a subdivision. Those are homes. I was in that subdivision yesterday. We've met with a lot of the people that live in that subdivision. That subdivision is on a giant hillside here. There's a large ridge that rises way above the rooftops of those homes. This entire ridge is to be protected. Every tree is to be protected. Essentially, the area of the development is this area from Highway 70 up into about level with this subdivision road right here coming across. And so when you look at the site in context, it's really hard to imagine how any of these people are going to be negatively impacted by the data center development. Most won't be able to see the project at all, and they won't be able to hear the project by ordinance.
My name is Jeffrey Bullard. I'm a reporter. We live there, and they've said that they've heard conversations at like some of the public meetings about a possible buyout. Is that something that you guys have spoken to each of those households? They've not had any official word from anyone.
The development agreement, I think, has a requirement if homes are within a certain distance. But I think we'd be willing to entertain talking to any of the neighbors if they're interested in selling their homes. I honestly don't think they'll want to sell their homes because I think with the amount of jobs and economic activity that's going to happen in this community, my personal belief is the value of the homes is going to go up.
Oregon shows that data center's water supply took in elevated nitrate level safety levels would allow. The aquifer under Festus doesn't stop at the property line of one of these people that lives on that subdivision there. So
well, that is a question I cannot answer. That is an engineering question, but I will get you an answer. But I would just say to you this, that we are committed to not having any degradation to the water service of anybody in the community. We won't build the project if we can't do it safely. Our commitment is to work diligently to conserve water use. We're going to build a closed water loop system. There are times in the heat of the summer for short periods of time where we may use more water than other times, that we're committed to not having any wastewater go in that's not as clean as the water that we bring in. And I personally don't think that water is going to be an overall issue, but every question will be answered in the community.
the site is a graveyard. Is that something you've been told, or?
I haven't seen any grave sites on the property. It's not unusual to find grave sites on rural properties. Typically, if they're Indian burial sites, there's a process that you have to go through archaeologically to address it. You can remove them, but we haven't seen any actual grave sites on the site. If we do, we'll either work around them or we'll remove them per the typical appropriate process.
Win back the public support this data center project for it to move forward. Is that on you? Is that on the elected officials that remain?
Ask the question again.
The onus on to win back the public support for this. You and Placo, is it on the Festus elected officials?
And I think it has to be a win-win for everybody. The onus is on us. Obviously, we're the ones that are developing the project, just like if we were going to build any other industrial project here, we're going to build a subdivision here. We're going to have to convince the community that it's good for their community. And you're not ever going to win every single person over 100% of the time. It's pretty interesting in my 40-year career. Many times I've had tremendous opposition to projects, finished projects, and then had the same community that was opposed to the project embrace it. A great case in point is the Sentinel project. I Don't know how many of you were around. Extremely controversial zoning process and entitlement process went through. I remember it really well. So I will tell you that the Sentinel buildings are beautiful and that the neighbors love the project now. It's an asset to the community. So
On that political,
they have been very vocal. They were in every meeting.
we're here engaging the media today suggests that it hasn't been very persuasive.
No, it's just the reason I'm with the media today is because two big things happened last week. There was an election where 4 opponents, who, like I said, I congratulate, were elected. We have to address that head on. And there was this litigation, which came from a citizens group, and we're going to address that head on as well. So I don't feel overly defensive. I feel overly like I want this project to happen in the eastern region of Missouri because I don't want Missouri to be left off the map. I think in 10 years it would be a terrific travesty for our community to turn back all of these data centers and watch all of this economic benefit happen in Kansas City, which it's happening right now, Ohio, Washington State, Oregon, which is a huge beneficiary of the data center boom there. If you just look at the economics, the economic engine that this is creating for these communities, it would be a travesty for St. Louis to miss out on that. That's my opinion.
In your opinion, having built dozens of these data centers across the country, what in your opinion is Jefferson County and the St. Louis region missing out on?
Well, for one thing, economic prosperity. How much different will Festus be when their budget is doubled? Their current budget is under $40 million. Once the data center starts operating, they'll have about $40 million a year of new revenue. The state benefits, the local economy benefits, but also this job will create thousands of construction jobs that'll last at least 4 or 5 years. Every single part of Festus will benefit. Pasta House will benefit, the local restaurants will benefit, the hotels will benefit, vacancy rates will go down, incremental pricing for all of those things will go up, and there will be prosperity. That's my personal opinion, and it's not just an opinion. If you go to the communities like Quincy, Washington, or some of the communities in Ohio, or even in Virginia, there's been a tremendous economic benefit to their communities that they recognize. And there's going to be the haves and there's going to be the have-nots, because this is going to be the new economy in the United States.
Skeptics for several years.
Clayco is holding ourselves to the previous standards in every single environmental regulation. We're not taking advantage of any of the new Trump administration regulations. We're holding ourselves to the same standards before.
To show people that the water is safe.
To my children, it means that we're going to hold ourselves to the higher standard. Plain and simple. I don't know what you mean. You think we're just going to pollute the water in Festus? We're absolutely, well, we've committed that we're not going to. It's an engineering question, and we're going to answer the question. I just answered it. We're not going to put anything back in the waste water that's worse than the water we bring in. So that's the answer to the question.
But how do you convince the residents of that hear that but still come off skeptical?
Well, I think we have to be as transparent as we need to be, and we have to have the testing and the testing agencies and follow all the regulations. The city and the counties and every place we're working in the United States, have methodologies for testing the water, the wastewater.
For example, of drinking a glass of water yourself, the crew. Could you see a demonstration like that happening?
It's possible.
Mr. Clerk.
The Donald Farm, I've seen it referred to as. Can you comment on that at all? Would that be similar size, scale, serve the same purpose?
I think it's way far away from even beginning the process.
The issue of whether the Festus City Council and Mayor could revoke the project agreement is something that might be litigated. But that aside, if the opposition to the data centers are successful in recalling the 4 other members of the City Council, recalling the Mayor, holding a special election, at what point for a hyperscale tenant like a Google or Microsoft is that just more risk and hardship that they're willing to do it? I mean, how do you get a commitment from
These things take on a life of their own, and sometimes they take years to develop. I think we're going to go through the process. We're going to deal with the people, the elections, and we're in this for the long haul. If I'm right, if the project is really an economic engine for the community, and enough people in the community see that, the project will happen. And if we don't win favor from enough people, the project won't happen. We still have a lot of work to do to make the project a reality. What I'm saying today, right now, is we're totally committed to trying to see it through, and that we believe our rights are vested by the council that was elected by the people before. In a very public process, our project was approved, and we intend to aggressively pursue the project on this property. Unfortunately, we have seen some, across the country, we've seen some violence, we've seen a higher number of threats than we've had in the past. And so, yeah, we've had to provide more security than we have had to in the past. That's just the world we live in, sadly. Sorry?
Provide more security like
At the job sites.
Mr. Clark, from a conservative national security standpoint, America's in a technology race with China. If communities keep blocking the data center developments, such as here in Festus, what happens to American AI capacity, military computing infrastructure, and our ability to compete globally?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's a tremendous concern that I have, that I share. I think that China is an adversary in every way, shape, and form. I think that's real. And I think they are building an enormous amount of energy, power plants, rebuilding their entire grid, and they are absolutely in the race to win it in the AI and quantum computing arena. And I think we cannot lose that.
Locally, how does...
I think the patriotic question is a good one to be answered by these communities. I don't think it rises up to the level it should as a key issue in the local communities. Obviously, people are more concerned about their water and their home values and that sort of thing. All of those questions, I think, are asked and need to be answered on a continuous basis. But this question of national security is real, and I think people who are really in the know are very, very concerned that we cannot lose the AI race in America.
What would you do differently that would generate more public support?
First of all, we had great public support for the project.
As we saw,
Well,
certainly dwindled.
it's eroded, and so we're lucky to have our vested rights right now. Again, we're not going to barge into the community and build this data center if we can't win at least some of these new council people over. We're going to have to sit in a room, we're going to have to listen to their concerns, and we're not going to be bulls in a china closet. That's just not the way we operate. So I think we have to listen to their questions, we have to show them more details, and we have to find compromise.
What would you do differently if you could start this whole process over?
Well, hindsight is 2020. I tell you, 6 months ago, we weren't here across the country. I think we're in the middle of this surge of opposition for these data centers. I think one thing I would do differently is I would have, if I had known what I know now, I think we would have urged all the technology companies to be much more transparent and open in their public processes, which they're doing now. And I think the technology companies are listening, and they are responding. If you've seen Microsoft's 5 key pledges, I think that's a huge step in the right direction for technology companies. AWS is right there. I think you'll see all of the technology companies step up to the plate. I think the transparency process will be a lot different. But the projects are going to be controversial because, the cat is out of the bag on this misinformation, and it's really, really hard to change people's opinion when facts don't matter anymore. And there's definitely an era that we're in right now where facts don't always win the day. I don't think there's a lack of transparency about that. I think what we said and what we say in all of these projects is that the data centers themselves, and one data center doesn't equal all data centers. There's training buildings, there's inference buildings, there's cloud buildings, there's edge buildings, and they all have a different employment base. I think some of the AI buildings, the trainer buildings, actually employ a good number more people than the original cloud inference centers. They got a bad reputation for maybe only having 100 jobs instead of 1,000 jobs, but they're usually 100 very high-paying jobs. I think the other thing that's hard to track and hard to explain is how much constant work is happening inside these facilities. There's constantly servers being changed. Those jobs are not counted. There's constant mechanical. There's constant upgrades in the electrical services in the building. So the reality is these projects, when we see them completed, they're never really completed. There's always construction going on. There's always additions. There's always what they call energy harvesting happening. So the question comes down to like how many full-time jobs are going to be on this campus? And we have never claimed that that's going to be a huge number. What we've said is that the overall payroll that happens on the jobs that we're building right now is so significant that it overwhelms a typical manufacturing plant that might operate for 15 or 20 years. And that's just simple math, but it's a hard explanation. Yeah, I would say that once we identify a hyperscaler, we'll be able to make that commitment, but it would be between 100 and 200 absolute minimum high-paying jobs that would be at the facility. We don't anticipate with the labor market the way it is in St. Louis to be bringing anybody from out of state. And it'll be an all-union job. Like all of our work in the St. Louis metropolitan area is 100% union. We enjoy a great relationship with them. If you take phase one on this project, you're talking about $6 billion development. Approximately $3 billion of that would be labor. That's a pretty intense amount of labor. That's the number I talk about. When you look at even a modern car manufacturing plant, might not have that big of a payroll over a 15 or 20 year period. So the misnomer that these don't create jobs is wrong. That's my view. I think we would be online in 2028. That's our plan. That would be the first phase, which would be approximately approximately a $6 billion investment.
If a whole gymnasium of opposition can line up and you still vote for it, it raises this suspicion or concern that maybe there must be some other motive. There must be like a kickback or some kind of under the table.
I'm not going to address that. No, that's a ridiculous question in my view. I hate to sound like Trump, but the accusation that there could be some untoward behavior is not an okay question, unless you have some facts to back it up. I would just tell you this. The council voted for this. You should interview each of them. They voted for this because they listened, they went and saw data centers, they know what their economic future is for their community, they have families in the community, and they voted for it because they believe it's in the best interest of their community.
Mr. Clark, how does CRG plan on engaging the community to educate them on the benefits of the data centers, specifically in Festus?
The same way we have been, just open public meetings. We're willing to attend the opposition meetings as long as they're safe. And I think, it's going to be a continuous public process all the way till we break ground, and it's going to be transparent, straightforward, and open. They're always secured. They're open facilities. I mean, it's not like it's a typical, security fence, nothing exaggerated or anything, like what I have here.
In downtown in St. Louis this week from the Board of Public Service about a potential data center coming to the Midtown area.
Which project?
The Arm of the Service is scheduled to resume those conversations this week.
I've stayed as far away from that project as I can. I'm not going to commit to always stay away from it, but I'm not engaged in it at this time. I think the city of St. Louis has a lot of work to do to get themselves ready for economic development, serious economic development and turnaround. And there's more questions to answer in the city than what they should or shouldn't do about a data center. It is hard to imagine a city that has such economic hardship not bending over backwards to try to figure out how to get an economic engine like a data center in their community. But I think they still have a bit of a dysfunctional charter, and they have a dysfunctional board of aldermen, which keeps us kind of off the playing field.
The data center, if you could coordinate that.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of data centers that are pretty easy to see, but I think we could coordinate getting folks into the data centers.
Talking, of course, about Eastern Missouri's potential for data center development, are there a lot of sites in places like this where there's, readily available transmission, or, is that kind of pinched or limited by overall transmission bottlenecks that the grid contends with?
That's a good question. I would say there's not a tremendous number of sites, but like any large-scale economic engine that you would bring to the community, whether it's a car plant or a battery plant or some other kind of manufacturing plant, Missouri has a limited number of sites in general because of the terrain. It's difficult to develop. This particular site has a lot of rock on it, so I think you have to take into consideration the whole myriad of issues when you're thinking about developing manufacturing or a data center plant. But I would say it's a very limited number on the eastern side. You got the floodplain. There are a lot of restrictions in the area that have kept manufacturing jobs out of the area in general.
We saw Missouri pass Senate Bill 4 last year to expand energy production and buttress the grid. Illinois is talking about ramping up nuclear power. Are we in a power race? And if not, as a country, should we be?
I think the country should be in a power race, and I think we should be not turning our back on any kind of power. I think wind, solar, gas. I think to the race with China and AI in general. And I think what's happening with these large language models, the expansion, the talk 6 months ago about the bubble in AI has mostly taken a backseat to the actual numbers of growth in cloud use and use of these AI models. So they use a lot of energy, and so there will absolutely be an energy race that I think will happen for the next 2 decades in the United States. I think that's a good thing for the United States. The United States in the last 20 years has seen a drop in overall electric use, and this has caused disinvestment. It has caused a lack of investment in the grid and transformers and substations, and I think that this is going to be the economic engine that allows us to get our grid where it should be in the United States. Any other questions? I think that's a wrap. I'll be around for a little bit if anybody has any individual questions. Thanks.